"Take that thing off. You're making first class look cheap." The words dropped like a stone in the cabin's hush. Emma Whitaker froze, her grandmother's cherished scarf clenched tight in her hands. Every eye in Silver Sky's premium cabin flickering to her, some with awkward sympathy, most with quiet judgment. She could almost feel their stares scraping over her sensible shoes, her simple navy coat, her 16-year-old nerves trying to hold together as her world was pulled out from under her. The voice had come from Linda Cooper, first-class purser, whose blonde hair and sharp blue eyes seemed engineered for the job. Linda stood over Emma, lips pursed, making no attempt to lower her voice as she sneered at the hand-knitted scarf. A faded swirl of deep blue and burgundy, the kind of thing that belonged, in Linda's mind, on a church charity table, not draped around the neck of a teenager in C2A. "First class has standards," Linda continued, her words for the entire cabin. "If you want to wear rags, there's always economy." Someone, Emma didn't see who, let out a snicker. The man across the aisle shifted uncomfortably and pretended to read his financial news, while a well-dressed older woman pursed her lips but said nothing. For one split second, Emma wondered if the floor would open up and swallow her. Her cheeks burned, her fingers curled even tighter around the scarf, knuckles white. This was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. Her first solo flight, her ticket to the National Youth Innovators Conference in LA. Her chance to prove that she could belong anywhere. Instead, she was being humiliated like a child, right in front of New York's most polished and privileged. The taste of shame was sharp at the back of her throat. Emma tried to steady her breathing, fighting the urge to cry or to run. She thought of her grandmother's voice, gentle but steely. "You don't let the world decide your worth, Emma, especially not in the air." But right now, she didn't feel strong, just small. And if Linda Cooper had looked closer, she might have seen the fire beginning to flicker behind Emma's wounded gaze. 30 minutes earlier, everything had felt different. Emma had woken up in her quiet room in Greenwich, Connecticut, the pale spring sunlight striping her walls, suitcase packed and stacked neatly by the door. Her grandmother, Eleanor Whitaker, aviation legend, business magnate, and the backbone of the Whitaker family, had made breakfast herself, a rare event. After a meal of pancakes and tea, Eleanor led Emma into the library, the walls lined with models of jets and signed contracts from decades of industry leadership. "I want you to take this with you," Eleanor said, looping the hand-knitted scarf carefully around Emma's neck. "I wore it when I closed my first billion-dollar deal. It's for luck, for legacy." Emma had smiled shyly, suddenly aware of the generations that watched over her from old family portraits. "I'll take good care of it, Nana." Eleanor cupped Emma's chin, her eyes as blue and sharp as a winter sky. "If anyone tries to make you feel less than you are, you remember, you're a Whitaker. There's nothing more premium than dignity." Outside, the family's longtime driver, Tom, had loaded Emma's bags into the Mercedes. The drive to JFK was filled with the usual city chaos. Morning traffic, honking cabs, the skyline rising from haze. But Emma was focused on her breathing, on the scarf's soft weight against her skin, on the day's endless possibility. At the terminal, Tom offered a gentle, "Safe travels, Miss Emma," before pressing a reassuring hand to her shoulder. Inside, the bustle of JFK was dizzying, but Emma navigated check-in and security with calm precision. She'd rehearsed it all with her parents and grandmother. At the Silver Sky first-class check-in, a cheerful agent even complimented her scarf. "What a beautiful piece. Family heirloom?" Emma's smile widened. "Yes, ma'am. My grandmother made it." The VIP lounge was another world, plush and polished, full of travelers who looked born into luxury. Emma felt out of place at first, but she remembered her grandmother's words and tried to enjoy the rare treat. She texted a selfie to her friends and to Nana. "Boarding soon. Scarf in place. Wish me luck." The reply came almost instantly. "You make your own luck, darling. Go be extraordinary." Back on the plane, the excitement had barely faded before Linda Cooper made sure to put Emma in her place. After Linda's public remark, Emma sat very still, the scarf coiled tight in her lap, her hands shaking. She could hear a few passengers murmuring, "Poor thing," or, "Well, there are rules." None of them loud enough for Linda to hear. None of them brave enough to intervene. The silence that followed was heavier than Linda's scorn. Emma blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall. She was not going to give Linda, or anyone else, that satisfaction. For a few endless minutes, Emma tried to disappear into her seat. She pulled out her phone, hesitating, and finally typed a message, her thumb trembling as she texted her grandmother, not sure if she was seeking comfort or simply a lifeline. "Nana, the flight attendant just humiliated me in front of everyone because of your scarf." She hit send, barely breathing, and tucked her phone away. She tried to distract herself with the safety card, the menu, the clouds drifting by the window. Nothing worked. She just kept replaying the words, "Take that thing off. There's always economy." Then, her phone buzzed. "Nana, you keep your head high, Emmy. No one decides your worth but you. I'll take care of this." Emma read the message again and again. There was something in those words, something calm, powerful, a reminder that even in humiliation, she was not alone. What she couldn't know, as the cabin prepared for takeoff, was that Nana's idea of taking care of this would soon send shockwaves through Silver Sky's executive suites and change the course of the airline forever. For now, Emma straightened in her seat, wrapped the scarf a little tighter, and silently promised herself she would not let shame win. Emma Whitaker had always felt that her family's house in Greenwich, Connecticut was something out of a storybook. Tall white columns, sprawling lawns, the kind of place where old trees seemed to whisper secrets from decades past. She'd grown up surrounded by evidence of her family's legacy. Photographs of ancestors posed beside gleaming private jets, news clippings about billion-dollar mergers, her father's vintage pilot jacket hanging near the door. But the true center of the Whitaker world was her grandmother, Eleanor, a woman whose presence filled every room. Some people said Eleanor Whitaker owned the sky. To Emma, she was simply Nana, the steady hand behind every scraped knee, the soft voice guiding her through heartbreak and triumph. Eleanor had taught Emma how to read, how to play chess, how to hold her chin up even when the world tried to push her down. That morning, as the first sunlight filtered through Emma's window, she'd woken to the familiar sound of Eleanor's footsteps on the stairs. The Whitakers were not a family for showy displays of affection. Their love was a quiet, enduring thing, woven into routines and rituals. For Emma, the surest sign of Nana's care was the way she made breakfast. Never rushed, never handed off to the staff, but prepared with intention. Emma found her grandmother in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, humming softly as she flipped pancakes. The scent of browning butter and maple syrup drifted through the house. Eleanor greeted Emma with a smile and a careful glance, checking for nerves, for excitement, for anything that might need tending. "Big day," Eleanor said, passing her a plate. "Your first solo adventure. You ready?" Emma shrugged, half smiling, a little nervous, but mostly excited. Eleanor poured them both tea. That's how you know you're about to do something important. After breakfast, they lingered in the kitchen, talking about everything and nothing. School, the conference in LA, whether Emma had remembered her presentation slides. Then, as the clock in the foyer chimed the hour, Eleanor stood and beckoned Emma to follow her down the hall. They entered the library, its walls lined with shelves of aviation history, biographies, manuals, framed contracts with presidents and prime ministers. Eleanor reached up to a high shelf, pulling down a small wooden box. She opened it and withdrew a scarf, navy blue and burgundy, hand-knit, soft but substantial. "This," Eleanor said, smoothing the yarn between her fingers, "is the luckiest thing I own. I wore it to my first boardroom deal. I wore it the day I signed the charter for Whitaker Aerospace." Emma's eyes widened. "You've never shown me this before." Eleanor smiled. "You never needed it, until now." She stepped closer, draping the scarf around Emma's neck with gentle hands. This scarf has seen rooms full of men who doubted me, who thought I was only there because of my last name. It soaked up sweat from the hardest decisions I've ever made, and tears when things didn't go my way. But every time, I remembered who I was and why I was there. Emma swallowed, feeling the soft fabric and the weight of the moment. I'm not you, Nana. No, Eleanor said, her voice both gentle and fierce. You're better. You have everything I built and the wisdom to make it your own. When you step on that plane, remember, you are never less than anyone in that cabin, not for a single second. Emma nodded, her throat tight. I'll do my best. Eleanor squeezed her hand. That's all I've ever asked. The hours that followed were a blur, packing last-minute items, checking flight times, fielding texts from friends wishing her luck. Her parents both called from their respective offices, her father promising to FaceTime as soon as she landed, her mother reminding her to keep your wits about you and don't forget to eat. Tom, the driver, arrived promptly at 9. He greeted Emma with a warm, fatherly smile and loaded her bags into the Mercedes. Eleanor hugged her one last time on the porch, whispering, You make me proud just by being you, Emmy. Go show them what you're made of. As they drove through the winding roads of Greenwich, Emma gazed out at the early spring landscape. Daffodils just starting to bloom, neighbors waving from manicured lawns. Her mind raced with thoughts of LA, the conference halls, the presentations, the possibility of making friends who understood her passions. But beneath all the excitement, there was a current of anxiety. What if she said the wrong thing? What if she didn't belong in those rooms? What if the world saw her only as the Whitaker girl, and not for who she really was? She touched the scarf at her throat, drawing comfort from its warmth. She pictured Eleanor, years earlier, standing alone in a boardroom full of skeptics. The courage it took, the poise, the refusal to let anyone define her value. Emma tried to draw that strength into herself, letting it settle over her like a shield. At JFK, Tom parked at the private entrance reserved for first-class travelers. He retrieved her suitcase and offered his hand as she stepped onto the curb. Remember, he said, lowering his voice, you're the classiest person here. Go enjoy your adventure. Inside, Emma joined the line at the Silver Sky first-class counter. The agent, a young woman named Marisa, greeted her with a genuine smile. Traveling alone? She asked. Emma nodded. First time, Marisa winked. You'll do great, and that scarf is lovely, by the way. Brings out your eyes. That simple kindness gave Emma a small burst of confidence. She found the VIP lounge, marveling at its quiet luxury, the gentle music, the wall of windows looking out on the tarmac, the endless buffet of croissants and fresh fruit. Most of the travelers were adults, exuding the effortless polish of old money. Emma felt a few glances land on her, measuring, evaluating. She straightened her shoulders, remembering Eleanor's words. You are never less than anyone in that cabin. She texted a quick photo of the scarf to her grandmother, captioned, On my way, thank you for everything. The reply came almost instantly. Love you, Emmy. Don't let the world dull your shine. She found a seat by the window, watching planes taxi past. For a moment, she let herself dream about the possibilities ahead, the ways she might make her own mark, the new memories she'd create. If she closed her eyes, she could almost hear her grandmother's voice in the hush of the lounge. You belong here. The world is yours, if you claim it. Emma smiled. She didn't know what awaited her on the flight or in Los Angeles, but she felt ready. Whatever came, she would face it with dignity. And as the announcement for first-class boarding echoed through the lounge, Emma stood, wrapped the scarf around her neck, and walked toward her future with her head held high. For most teenagers, the airport is an exhilarating blur. New cities, crowded gates, the buzz of possibility. For Emma Whitaker, who'd grown up in the serene comfort of Greenwich and mostly traveled with family, the Silver Sky first-class lounge at JFK was a different world entirely. Everything felt just a little bit sharper. The echo of expensive shoes on marble, the hush of private conversations, the subtle perfume of old money and expectations. She'd barely set down her overnight bag before she felt it, a prickle at the back of her neck, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. It wasn't hostile exactly, but it wasn't welcoming either. Some passengers glanced her way and looked quickly back at their laptops. Others let their eyes linger, silently taking in her age, her simple clothes, the scarf that even here drew gentle curiosity. Emma had been prepared to feel out of place. She hadn't expected to feel so obviously outnumbered. She took a seat near the window, hoping to blend in, but her hands fidgeted with the scarf as she watched the rain streak across the glass. The lounge attendant, a young man with perfectly styled hair and an accent she couldn't quite place, approached with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "May I get you something to drink, miss?" he asked, a practiced politeness in every syllable. "Water would be great, thank you," Emma replied, her voice a bit smaller than she intended. He nodded, but when he returned moments later, he placed her glass on the very edge of her side table, almost as an afterthought. The next guest, a woman in her 50s, dripping with pearls, received a flute of champagne and a warm, personal greeting. Emma tried to brush it off, but she felt the difference all the same. A pair of girls about her age drifted through the lounge, both in designer jeans and monogrammed luggage, chatting about ski trips and legacy weekends. One looked at Emma, glanced away, then leaned over to whisper something to her friend, her gaze flitting pointedly to the scarf. Emma tried not to notice. She focused instead on her grandmother's last message, scrolling back through her phone for reassurance. "You are never less than anyone in that cabin. Not for a single second." Still, her confidence wavered. Everything about the lounge screamed exclusivity. The high ceilings, the soft jazz, the attendants gliding quietly between guests. Emma had always imagined that luxury meant comfort, but here it seemed to mean separation. She felt as though she were playing a part in a play where everyone else already knew their lines. Have you ever walked into a room and just known you didn't quite fit in, even when you had every right to be there? How did you handle it? Comment #YouBelong if you've ever felt like Emma did in that lounge. Sometimes, even the most beautiful places can feel a little bit cold. Soon it was time for boarding. As the announcement for first-class passengers sounded, Emma watched the crowd shift. Businessmen in tailored suits, couples with matching carry-ons, women whose shoes probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. She rose, smoothing her skirt, gathering her things. A few people glanced her way, one or two with the briefest hint of a smile, as if surprised to see someone like her in their midst. At the gate, a Silver Sky staff member stood scanning boarding passes. When Emma stepped forward, the woman looked her up and down, her eyes landing briefly on the scarf. "First time flying first class, honey?" she asked, the question soft but edged. Emma nodded, determined to keep her chin up. "Yes, ma'am." The woman's smile was tight. "Enjoy. It's a whole different world up there." The words echoed in Emma's mind as she made her way down the jet bridge. She could sense the careful choreography of wealth and expectation all around her. At the aircraft door, two flight attendants stood ready, one young and cheerful, the other middle-aged, with flawless hair and an air of command. Linda Cooper. Even before Linda spoke, Emma felt the temperature drop. "Welcome aboard," Linda said to the couple ahead, her smile wide and bright. When it was Emma's turn, that smile faded into something neutral, almost chilly. "Boarding pass, please." Emma handed it over. Linda took her time, turning it over, holding it to the light as if checking for a counterfeit. The moment stretched. Emma felt her cheeks color as the businessman behind her shifted impatiently. Linda's eyes flickered to the scarf. "First class, seat 2A, to your left." The words were flat, transactional. No warm greeting, no offer of assistance. Emma walked to her seat, heart pounding, wishing she could sink into the plush leather and become invisible. She tried to busy herself. arranging her bag, placing her phone in the side pocket, smoothing the scarf across her lap. As she settled in, she couldn't help but notice how the other passengers seemed to fit seamlessly into their surroundings. A businessman in a navy suit immediately ordering a double espresso, a woman opening a glossy magazine, another passenger chatting familiarly with a flight attendant about their favorite Napa vineyard. Emma felt like an intruder in a private club. Linda moved up and down the aisle, greeting regulars with familiarity. "Good to see you again, Mr. Goldstein. Welcome back, Mrs. Farrow." When she reached Emma's row, she paused, gaze lingering a beat too long on the scarf. "Would you like anything to drink?" Linda asked. The question was clipped, almost perfunctory. Emma managed a quiet, "Just water, please." Linda nodded and moved on, but Emma caught the look she exchanged with another attendant, a slight raise of the eyebrows, a half smirk. Emma stared out the window, wishing the plane would just take off and deliver her somewhere she belonged. The seat beside her remained empty as more first-class passengers boarded. Emma watched as a teenage boy, perhaps a year older than her, strolled down the aisle in expensive headphones. Linda greeted him with a bright, "Welcome, Mr. Harrison," not even glancing at his ticket. Emma wondered how he did it, walked into any room like he owned the place, never questioned, never doubted. The final straw came as Linda returned with drinks. She handed Emma a glass of water without a word, then turned to the businessman across the aisle. "Will it be champagne to start your trip, Mr. Jacobs?" she said warmly, pouring the sparkling wine with practiced grace. Emma looked down at the scarf in her lap, fingers tracing the familiar stitches. She remembered her grandmother's hands, steady and sure, wrapping her in encouragement and love. In that moment, the scarf felt less like protection and more like a bullseye. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. She knew she didn't belong, at least not in the way the others did. But she also knew she carried something none of them could see, a legacy, a story, a sense of worth that no amount of coldness could erase. If you were Emma, would you have spoken up or stayed silent and waited it out? Have you ever let a small gesture, like a family heirloom or a kind word, remind you of your own value? Share your experience below. Sometimes those stories help someone else feel less alone. The engines hummed, the safety demonstration began, and Emma forced herself to sit tall, to hold her grandmother's words close. She wasn't sure what awaited her at 30,000 feet, but she promised herself she wouldn't let anyone, not even Linda Cooper, convince her she was less than she was. And as the plane began to taxi toward the runway, Emma clutched her scarf, bracing herself for whatever turbulence, real or imagined, might come next. Dưới đây là chương 4, một nhành tù. Bám sát dàn ý chương 4, tiếp viên công khai nhục mạ. Hành động đến điểm, toàn bộ khoang đều chứng kiến, Emma bàng hoàng và tổn thương. Sự im lặng, lạnh nhạt của hành khách. Sự xuất hiện của một nhân chứng giả. Văn phong tự nhiên, giàu cảm xúc, đúng insight khán giả trung niên và thư viện truyền Karma Telltales. The hum of the engines faded into the background as Emma tried to disappear into her seat. She clung to the rhythm of her breath, steadying herself with the familiar texture of her grandmother's scarf between her fingers. Outside her window, the runway glistened with rain. Inside, the world felt cold and closed. As the last first-class passengers settled, Linda Cooper swept through the aisle with the practiced poise of someone who knew she ruled this domain. She checked the overhead bins, greeted regulars by name, and then, almost theatrically, paused beside Emma's seat, letting the silence draw attention. "Miss," Linda announced, voice loud enough to reach every row, "we have certain standards in this cabin. Items of personal attire that do not meet our dress code should be removed." Emma's head snapped up, confusion and embarrassment battling across her face. I'm sorry. Is there a problem with my scarf?" Linda's lips curled. "First-class guests are expected to uphold a certain image. That scarf, it's not suitable for our premium environment. Please remove it." The words hung in the air, heavy and public. Heads turned. Conversations stilled. The businessman across the aisle raised his brows. A woman at the bulkhead frowned into her magazine. For a split second, Emma felt the whole cabin's gaze pin her to the seat, her cheeks burning, ears ringing. She reached for the scarf, hands trembling. It was instinct, wanting to do anything to end the scrutiny, but something inside her resisted. This wasn't just a scarf. It was her grandmother's strength, a piece of her family's story. It was love woven into wool. Still, the pressure of so many eyes was crushing. Her voice came out a whisper. "It's from my grandmother. She gave it to me for luck." Linda's response was swift and icy. "Luck is not on the dress code, miss. Please comply." A short, uncomfortable laugh broke from somewhere behind Emma. Someone trying to lighten the mood, or maybe just embarrassed by the spectacle. The flight attendant beside Linda looked away, unwilling to meet Emma's eyes. No one spoke up. If you've ever watched someone be humiliated for something that mattered to them, a family tradition, a keepsake, a piece of their identity, you know how that silence feels. Have you ever been in that moment wishing someone would say something but nobody does? Let us know below if you've seen it or lived it yourself. Emma's throat tightened, but she couldn't trust her voice. With trembling fingers, she slowly unwound the scarf and folded it neatly in her lap. She wanted to disappear, to vanish into the seat and become invisible. Instead, she sat exposed, the loss sharp as a slap. Linda nodded, satisfied. "Thank you for your cooperation. We want all our passengers to feel proud of first class." Emma kept her gaze fixed on the window, but in the reflection, she caught sight of a few other passengers exchanging awkward looks. Some looked away, others avoided her completely. No one offered a word of comfort, not even a sympathetic glance. In that heavy silence, a voice broke through. It was gentle, dignified, belonging to an older woman 2 rows behind, her hair a striking silver, her presence quietly commanding. "Excuse me, Miss Cooper," the woman called, her tone even but edged with authority. "I've flown first class since before you were born, and I've never seen a policy against a young lady wearing her grandmother's scarf. If we're policing knitwear now, perhaps the dress code needs rewriting, not the passengers." For the first time, Linda's mask faltered. "Mrs. Anderson, we appreciate your feedback, but airline policy is about service, not humiliation," Mrs. Anderson interrupted. Her eyes met Emma's, and for the briefest moment, Emma felt a lifeline tossed her way. A reminder that not everyone agreed with Linda's silent rules. Linda stiffened, but made no reply. She turned on her heel and retreated toward the galley, leaving a ripple of tension behind her. Emma sat, hands pressed into the scarf on her lap, eyes burning. She tried to focus on her breath, the memory of her grandmother's encouragement echoing in her mind. "You're a Whitaker. There's nothing more premium than dignity." But her dignity felt battered, trampled under the gaze of strangers. Shame pulsed through her. Humiliation mixed with anger. Why had no one spoken up? Why had it taken an older woman, a fellow passenger, to offer even that small resistance? The rest of the cabin seemed determined to pretend nothing had happened. Newspapers rustled, screens flickered. A flight attendant offered drinks 2 rows back, voice now carefully cheerful. Have you ever felt the urge to vanish after being singled out for something that made you proud? Or seen someone else shrink under the weight of unfair attention? Comment below if you've experienced moments like this. Sometimes sharing your story helps another person feel less alone. Minutes passed, each one heavy with the aftershocks of what had just unfolded. Emma squeezed her eyes shut, replaying the moment again and again. Each time, the sting was sharper. Then a soft voice spoke beside her. Mrs. Anderson had quietly moved forward during the drink service and now rested a gentle hand on Emma's arm. "Don't let them take your pride, dear. Sometimes the quiet ones have the most powerful stories." She squeezed Emma's hand, then returned to her seat, leaving a wave of warmth in her wake. Emma sat straighter, breathing in slow and deep. The scarf rested in her lap, a badge of both pain and resilience. Maybe she hadn't defended herself in that moment. Maybe her voice had faltered. But she wasn't alone. Not entirely. And as the plane climbed skyward, Emma looked out at the clouds and made a quiet promise to herself. She would remember this moment, not with shame, but as a spark. The world could judge, humiliate, or turn away, but she would not let them erase who she was. Not ever. The sky beyond Emma's window was the color of slate, clouds streaking past in long, silent ribbons. The fasten seatbelt sign glowed overhead, a quiet reminder that she was locked into this moment. No escape, no pause button, just the endless stretch of hours ahead. She blinked back the heat in her eyes, swallowing the sting left by Linda's words. The scarf, now folded in her lap, felt heavier than ever. She'd wanted this flight to be a celebration, the start of her independence. Instead, it had become a test, a trial by humiliation in front of people who would forget her name before landing. For a moment, she let her gaze drift over the first-class cabin. The businessman across the aisle was deep into a spreadsheet, never once looking her way. A pair of middle-aged women whispered behind manicured hands. Even the teenagers she'd seen in the lounge earlier, so loud, so self-assured, seemed to shrink away, suddenly absorbed in their phones. No one wanted to risk Linda's attention. No one wanted to be next. Emma tried to focus on her breath, remembering her grandmother's advice. Dignity is quiet, Emmy. Sometimes the world mistakes it for weakness. Don't let them fool you. But the ache in her chest made each inhale feel shaky and thin. Linda returned with the meal service, her face an unreadable mask. She handed Emma's tray down without a word, then leaned closer than necessary as she topped off the businessman's wine. "Everything all right here?" she asked him sweetly, loud enough for Emma to hear. He nodded, barely acknowledging Emma's presence. Linda straightened, glancing down at Emma. "If you need anything, press the call button. Please try not to disrupt the other guests." Emma flinched, cheeks hot. The message was clear. Don't draw attention. Don't make a scene. Don't remind anyone that you don't belong. She tried to eat, but the food tasted like cardboard. Every sound felt amplified. The clink of ice in a glass, the rustle of newspapers, the low hum of privileged conversation. It was as if an invisible wall had gone up around her seat. Have you ever felt yourself shrinking in a room, wishing you could just disappear? Or watched someone else fade under the weight of silent judgment? Comment below if you know that feeling. Sometimes, just knowing you're not alone can make all the difference. Time stretched. Emma drifted between thoughts. Memories of her grandmother's laugh, her parents' encouragement, the pride she'd felt boarding the plane. Now, all that confidence felt distant, washed away by embarrassment. But beneath the shame, a new feeling simmered. Anger. It started as a flicker, then grew sharper each time she replayed Linda's words in her mind. Who gave her the right? Who made her judge and jury of who belonged and who didn't? Emma's phone buzzed in her bag. She checked it discreetly under the tray table. A new message from Nana. "Just landed a big meeting, darling. Hope you're having a blast. Remember, you decide who you are, not them. Love you." A wave of warmth filled Emma, chasing away some of the chill. She typed a reply, hesitant. "It's harder than I thought, Nana. People here, some of them aren't kind, but I'm okay." She didn't mention the scarf or the humiliation. She wasn't ready to share the worst parts, not yet, but just writing to her grandmother helped. It was a thread connecting her back to herself. Linda reappeared, clearing trays with brisk efficiency. When she reached Emma, she stopped. "You finished?" she asked, her voice devoid of the syrupy tone she used with other guests. Emma nodded, avoiding eye contact. Linda reached for the tray, her arm brushing roughly against Emma's. The water glass tipped, sending a small splash onto the scarf in Emma's lap. "Oh dear," Linda said, her voice falsely concerned. "You really should be more careful. Maybe that's why we have a dress code." A few passengers looked up, but no one intervened. The silence was sharper than any words. Emma bit her lip, pressing the napkin to the damp wool. The stain was small, but it felt like a final insult. For a moment, she wanted to shout, to demand that Linda treat her like everyone else, but the words caught in her throat. She'd never been good at confrontation. She didn't want to give Linda another reason to single her out, but she also knew she couldn't stay silent forever. A shadow fell across her aisle. Mrs. Anderson, the silver-haired woman who had spoken up before, stood beside her, pretending to retrieve something from the overhead bin. She leaned close, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't let her get to you, Emma. People like that count on your silence. You have more strength than you think." Emma looked up, searching Mrs. Anderson's eyes for a trace of judgment. Instead, she found only kindness. "Thank you," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. Mrs. Anderson squeezed her shoulder gently, then returned to her seat, the brief exchange hidden from Linda's view. The gesture stayed with Emma, lighting a small fire inside her. Maybe she wasn't ready to stand up in front of the whole cabin, not yet. But she wasn't as alone as she'd felt a moment ago, and she wasn't as powerless either. As the plane soared through the clouds, Emma made herself a quiet promise. The next time someone tried to make her small, she would remember this feeling. Not the shame, but the spark of anger. The reminder that dignity could survive even in silence. She pulled the scarf closer, feeling the wet patch where Linda's carelessness had left its mark. It wasn't ruined. It was a mark of what she'd endured, and proof that she could keep going. If you've ever faced down quiet cruelty and come out stronger, share your story below. Sometimes it's the smallest moments of kindness, or the smallest acts of courage, that start the biggest changes. The rest of the flight stretched ahead, uncertain but not hopeless. Emma settled into her seat, her reflection shimmering faintly in the window. She might not have found her voice yet, but it was there, waiting, gathering strength with every mile she traveled. And in the hush of first class, with only the sound of engines for company, she began to believe. Maybe she did belong here. Maybe she always had. The airplane's steady hum was usually soothing, but today it was a kind of prison song. Emma pressed her palm against the cool oval window, watching the clouds stream by in perfect silence. She tried to anchor herself, counting her breaths, tracing the ridges of her grandmother's scarf with restless fingers. But she couldn't shake the growing tension in the cabin. It felt like everyone was waiting for something, everyone but Linda Cooper, who seemed determined to deliver another lesson in humiliation. It started small. Linda passed by with her cart, pausing to offer cookies and tea to every passenger. When she reached Emma, Linda set a single battered packet of pretzels on her tray with a forced smile. "We've run out of fresh pastries, I'm afraid," she said, the words clipped. "Maybe next time." Emma looked at the sad little package, her cheeks coloring. She thought about saying something, but bit her tongue. The businessman across the aisle received not only a selection of pastries, but a friendly conversation about his favorite French bakery in the city. The two older women behind Emma clinked glasses, barely bothering to hide their smirks. Linda moved on, her heels clicking down the aisle, but the air seemed to chill in her wake. Emma sat rigid, trying to focus on her notebook, her mind whirring with possible responses. Should she complain? Would that only make it worse? The old urge to shrink away, be invisible, cause no trouble, fought with something new and hot inside her. A half hour later, the situation escalated. Linda returned to check on the passengers as the flight neared cruising altitude. She stopped by Emma's seat, voice sharp. "Miss, I'll need you to keep your belongings stowed. This isn't a dorm room." Her eyes lingered on the scarf, still folded in Emma's lap. "And please, for the comfort of our other guests, try not to draw attention." Emma felt every pair of eyes in first class slide to her, some curious, some just grateful it wasn't them. The words stung. She sat up straighter, meeting Linda's gaze. "I'm not doing anything disruptive," Emma said quietly. "I'm just sitting here." Linda's smile was tight. "We like to maintain a certain atmosphere in first class. You may not be aware, but standards are important to us." Emma's voice trembled, but she kept her eyes level. "I understand, but I have a ticket like everyone else." For the first time, there was a flicker in Linda's expression. Surprise, maybe, or annoyance that Emma dared to respond at all. The older man across the aisle, who hadn't said a word all flight, rustled his newspaper and cleared his throat. Linda glanced at him, then back at Emma. "Of course," Linda said coolly. "If you need anything, please don't hesitate to press your call button." There was no warmth, no welcome. She moved on. The silence in the cabin deepened, uncomfortable. Some passengers shot Emma sympathetic glances, but most kept their eyes down. The two teenagers in the back exchanged nervous looks, whispering behind raised hands. Have you ever seen someone singled out for no good reason and felt the urge to step in, but stayed silent? Why do you think people choose silence even when they know something is wrong? Comment below if you've witnessed moments like this, or if you wish you'd had the courage to say something. Emma's hands trembled, but her resolve solidified. She wasn't going to hide her scarf. Not for Linda, not for anyone. She placed it neatly across her knees, letting the familiar colors show. Mrs. Anderson, the silver-haired woman who had spoken up before, caught Emma's eye from 2 rows back. With a barely perceptible nod, she mouthed, "You're doing fine." The smallest affirmation, but it meant everything. Emma felt a flicker of hope. The flight dragged on. Linda's hostility didn't waver. Every time she passed Emma's row, there was an undercurrent, a coldness, a deliberate omission, sometimes even a muttered comment to the other flight attendant that Emma couldn't quite catch. At one point, Linda stopped to chat with the 2 women in the next row, who made a show of glancing back at Emma and tittering behind their hands. "Some people just don't get it, do they?" one of them whispered, not nearly quietly enough. Emma felt her face flush, anger and humiliation fighting inside her. She straightened her shoulders, trying to reclaim a little space for herself. She wasn't going to be pushed out of her own seat by someone else's prejudice. She reached for her phone and snapped a quick photo of her scarf against the cabin's white leather seats. A silent record, a keepsake, or maybe evidence for later. She wasn't sure which. Linda passed by once more, this time pausing with a look of thinly veiled annoyance. "Is there a problem, miss?" she asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. Emma looked up, voice calm. "No problem at all. I just wanted to remember my first time in first class." Linda blinked, perhaps caught off guard by the lack of apology. She said nothing, simply moved on. If you were in Emma's place, would you have spoken up or kept your head down? Sometimes it takes only a gentle word to remind the world you have a right to be there. Share how you'd handle it, or tell us if you've been in Emma's shoes before. The rest of the cabin pretended not to notice, but the energy had shifted. The old man put down his newspaper and gave Emma a respectful nod. Even the teenagers in the back stopped whispering, one of them offering Emma a tentative, sympathetic smile. Mrs. Anderson caught Emma's eye again and gave her a small thumbs up. That, more than anything, made Emma's heart lift. She wasn't alone. Not completely. For the first time since boarding, Emma allowed herself a small, private smile. She wasn't trying to make a scene. She just wanted to exist. Dignified, visible, worthy. And as the clouds rolled past outside, she knew that sometimes quiet resistance was the bravest thing you could do. And in that rarefied air, among strangers and silence, Emma realized, sometimes the world tries to shrink you, but you can choose not to disappear. The plane had reached its cruising altitude, but inside the first-class cabin, the air felt thicker than ever. Conversation was hushed, laughter stilted, as if everyone was waiting for the next shoe to drop. Emma sat perfectly still, back straight against the plush leather, her grandmother's scarf resting like a fragile badge across her knees. Each time Linda swept past, her posture crisp, her expression unreadable, Emma's heart jumped. She'd never imagined a flight could feel so long. She stole glances around the cabin, The businessman across the aisle avoided her eyes. The teenagers whispered and cast furtive looks. The two well-dressed women shook their heads with faint, knowing smiles. There was a tension in the air, a sense that something private had become painfully public, and everyone was complicit in the silence. Emma's mind whirled with arguments and comebacks she could never bring herself to say out loud. Why shouldn't I wear my grandmother's scarf? Why do you care what I look like? Why is everyone pretending not to see? But every time she considered speaking up, she felt the weight of the cabin's judgment pressing her down. She was still just 16, and the world outside Greenwich had never felt so cold. Have you ever felt the urge to defend yourself, but the words wouldn't come out? Or watched someone else be treated unfairly and regretted not stepping in? Share your story below if you know that helpless feeling. Sometimes, just saying it out loud is a first step. Linda's next pass was the worst yet. As she distributed hot towels, she deliberately skipped Emma's row. The woman beside Emma, a silver-haired matron who'd observed everything, hesitated, then quietly offered Emma her own towel. Here, dear. You look like you could use this more than I do. Emma accepted the gesture with a grateful nod, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The towel was small comfort, but it meant everything. The old woman leaned in, her voice so low only Emma could hear. My name is Mrs. Anderson. Don't let her decide your worth. This isn't about a scarf, it's about power, and the best way to take it back is to hold your head high. Emma swallowed hard. The words burrowed deep, mixing with her grandmother's advice, her parents' pride, her own fragile resolve. She looked down at the scarf and realized for the first time that it wasn't just an accessory. It was a piece of history, of family, of herself. From the back of the cabin, the two teenagers were arguing in stage whispers. I told you, she's not doing anything wrong. Yeah, but you know how these people are. If you complain, you're off the flight. Emma heard every word. It made her flush with anger, and strangely, with hope. At least someone saw the unfairness. Maybe, if she could find her voice, others would find theirs too. The businessman cleared his throat, glancing at Emma, then quickly away. Across the aisle, one of the well-dressed women shifted in her seat, discomfort plain on her face. But no one spoke. Maybe they're just afraid, Emma thought. Or maybe they just don't care. She turned to the window, searching for something steady outside, something bigger than this narrow world of polite cruelty and silent witnesses. The clouds below rolled on, oblivious, indifferent. Emma pressed her forehead against the glass, letting the coolness steady her thoughts. Her phone buzzed in her lap. A new message from Nana. Proud of you, Emmy. Whatever happens, remember, your story is just beginning. The world belongs to the brave. Emma closed her eyes, letting the words settle into her bones. For a moment, she allowed herself to dream, not just of surviving this flight, but of being the kind of person who made a difference, who stood up not only for herself, but for anyone who felt small or out of place. If you could speak to your younger self, or to someone who feels powerless, what would you say? Drop a message of encouragement in the comments. Sometimes your words are exactly what someone else needs to hear. A sudden jolt of turbulence rattled the plane. Emma clutched the armrest, her heart pounding, and realized the fear she felt wasn't about flying. It was about being seen, being vulnerable, being different in a place that prized conformity above all. Linda's voice rang out, bright and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. We're expecting some light turbulence. It sounded so normal, so routine. But beneath the announcement, Emma heard something else. A warning, a reminder to stay in line. Mrs. Anderson caught her gaze again. The older woman smiled, soft but steady. Courage is quiet, Emma. Sometimes it's just getting through the moment. Emma nodded. She didn't have a speech prepared. She didn't have a dramatic comeback. But she had herself, and her scarf, and the growing belief that maybe, just maybe, she could choose how this story ended. As the plane steadied, Emma straightened in her seat. She wrapped her grandmother's scarf tighter around her shoulders, not as a shield, but as a silent declaration. She might not shout, but she would not disappear. And somewhere in that hush, a shift began. Not just in Emma, but in the people watching her, in the energy of the cabin itself. The breaking point had come and gone. What mattered now was what happened next. The flight wore on, every minute thick with tension, every polite smile hiding something raw beneath. Emma felt the weight of 100 silent judgments pressing in from all sides, each more suffocating than the last. Even the hum of the engine seemed sharper, as if the plane itself were holding its breath. Linda had become a storm, sweeping up and down the aisle with renewed purpose. Each time she passed Emma's seat, there was a new slight. A tray set down with a clatter, a napkin snatched away with unnecessary force, an icy glance exchanged with the women in row 4, who had clearly decided Emma was not one of them. Emma wondered how so many people could find so many small ways to remind her she didn't belong. But this time, Linda decided it wasn't enough to whisper her displeasure. She wanted the whole cabin to see. After lunch, as Emma tried to lose herself in her notebook, Linda stopped abruptly by her side. In a voice pitched for everyone to hear, she said, "Miss, I'll need you to move your personal item. First class is not for clutter." She gestured at Emma's modest bag, tucked carefully under the seat. "Other guests are complaining it's in their way." Emma looked up, heart pounding. Her bag was smaller than most and hadn't bothered anyone all flight. She glanced at the nearest passenger, who avoided her gaze. "I can move it closer to me," Emma replied, voice steady but quiet. "But it's not in anyone's way." Linda's smile was all ice. "I'm not going to argue, miss. We expect cooperation from all passengers." She turned, looking to the women in row 4 as if expecting support. They nodded in agreement, lips pursed. Emma felt heat crawling up her neck. This was different. Linda wasn't just targeting her. She was inviting others to participate. It was humiliation, plain and public, and Emma's cheeks burned with the sting of it. If you've ever been the one singled out for something you didn't do, if you've watched the crowd turn, not out of malice, but out of habit or fear, tell us how you handled it. Did you speak up, or did you swallow your words to avoid making it worse? Emma's hands clenched. This time, something in her shifted. She remembered Nana's words, "You decide who you are." She remembered Mrs. Anderson's gentle wisdom, and she realized, with a sudden clarity, that her silence was the permission Linda needed. She looked up, meeting Linda's gaze. "My bag isn't in anyone's way. I paid for this seat, and I have the right to keep my things with me, just like everyone else." The words rang through the cabin, soft but clear. For a moment, Linda seemed genuinely startled, unused to being challenged. A ripple moved through the rows. The businessman in the navy suit looked up from his laptop. The teenagers at the back exchanged glances. Even the women in row 4 hesitated, unsure whether to double down or shrink away. Linda recovered quickly. "If there's a problem, I can have a supervisor speak with you in Los Angeles." "That's fine," Emma replied, voice steadying. "I'll be happy to talk to someone." Mrs. Anderson caught Emma's eye and smiled, a small, proud nod. Emma felt a surge of strength, not because she'd won, but because she'd refused to disappear. Linda retreated, but the cabin's mood had shifted. Some passengers looked uncomfortable. One of the teenagers, emboldened, shot Emma a thumbs up. The businessman gave her a quick, silent nod of approval. Others stared at their screens, pretending nothing had happened. But the line had been crossed, and everyone felt it. The rest of the flight was different. Linda no longer tried to bait Emma, but her chill was still obvious. The two women in row 4 stopped their snide whispers. Even the general silence seemed to say, something important had just happened, and no one was quite sure what to do next. Emma pressed her hand to her scarf, heart thundering. Not from fear, but from a strange kind of victory. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't made a scene, but for the first time she had stood up, even if her voice shook. It was enough. Mrs. Anderson stopped by Emma's seat as the plane began its descent. "You did well, Emma," she said quietly. "Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just refusing to be erased." Emma's eyes shimmered with gratitude. She thought of Nana, her parents, everyone who had taught her that real worth comes from within. She realized she'd crossed her own line, not just defending a bag, but defending her place in the world. As the flight attendants prepared the cabin for landing, the sky outside burned gold and blue. Emma gazed out the window, feeling a new steadiness take root inside her. Maybe the world wasn't always fair. Maybe people could be cruel or simply silent. But she didn't have to play the role they'd written for her. And for anyone watching or reading, if you've ever felt small or out of place, or pressured to give up a piece of yourself to fit in, you are not alone. Share your story, or simply leave a message for someone else who needs to hear that it's okay to stand your ground. The plane dipped toward Los Angeles, and Emma closed her notebook, her name and story written bold across the last page. Whatever happened next, she would not let herself disappear. She had found her line and crossed it, head held high. The plane touched down at LAX with a muted thump, rolling down the runway under a pale California sky. As the engines powered down, the first-class cabin seemed to exhale at last, but the tension hadn't fully dissipated. Instead, it lingered in the space between passengers, an invisible residue from the storm that had played out at 30,000 feet. Linda Cooper busied herself with the final cabin check, her posture stiffer than ever. She exchanged sharp glances with the women in row 4, the kind of silent communication that said, "We handled that just fine." But their forced confidence seemed more brittle than victorious. Emma sat quietly, her hands resting atop her grandmother's scarf, eyes fixed out the window. The city beyond was bright, bustling, alive in a way that made her ordeal feel both small and strangely momentous. She felt emptied out and filled up all at once, exhausted, raw, but with a glimmer of something steady inside her. As the seatbelt sign chimed off, passengers rushed to gather their things. The businessman across the aisle caught Emma's eye and, for the first time, offered her a nod. Not of pity, but of respect. The teenagers from the back row hesitated by her seat as they passed. One blushed, then muttered, "You did great." The other just smiled, quick and genuine. Even so, most people kept their distance, eager to exit, eager to forget. Emma felt the sting of it, but also the freedom. She didn't need their approval, not after everything she'd endured. Linda blocked the aisle as Emma stood to collect her bag. "Thank you for flying Silver Sky," Linda said, her words polite, but her tone cold. "We hope your next experience will be more comfortable." Emma met her gaze, steady and unafraid. "I hope so too," she replied. "For everyone." Mrs. Anderson, who'd quietly waited near the front, stepped aside as Emma approached. The older woman pressed a folded note into Emma's hand. "Don't forget, sometimes dignity is the only victory worth having." Emma smiled, holding the note close, feeling its weight and meaning. She wanted to thank Mrs. Anderson, to say something wise or grateful, but the words failed her. In the end, a soft "thank you" was enough. As they moved into the jet bridge, Emma felt the weight of the flight begin to slip away. She drew a deep breath, letting the air of a new city fill her lungs. The world was bigger here, wider, with room to stand tall. Have you ever come through something that left you shaken but stronger? What did you learn about yourself in that moment? Share below and let someone else borrow your courage. She stopped in a quiet corner by the terminal windows, unfolding the note from Mrs. Anderson. The handwriting was neat, assured. "Dear Emma, when people try to shrink you, remember, you are already the right size. With admiration, Evelyn Anderson." Emma felt tears prick her eyes, but this time they were born of gratitude. She reached for her phone, thumbing a quick message to Nana. Landed. Hard flight, but I made it. I stood up for myself. I didn't let them win. Nana's reply was almost instant. Proud of you, Emmy. The world is watching. Now, what's your next move? Emma paused, her grandmother's question echoing in her mind. What was her next move? The anger and shame of the flight still buzzed beneath her skin, but it no longer controlled her. She had found her voice, however small. She had allies, seen and unseen, and she had a choice, to let this be the end of her story or the beginning of something greater. She watched the planes taxi and take off, each carrying hundreds of stories. For the first time, Emma realized hers could matter, not just to her, but to anyone who'd ever felt erased, belittled, or forced to stay silent. Maybe it was time to make that call, the kind that changes everything. As she stepped forward into the sunlit terminal, Emma carried herself differently. The battle in the sky was over, but the real work, the fight for respect, for justice, for her own place in the world, was only just beginning. Emma found a quiet alcove near the baggage claim, away from the rush of arrivals and hurried reunions. The city's late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting gold stripes on the polished tile. For the first time since takeoff, she let herself breathe. Really breathe, without bracing for the next slight, the next public shaming. She looked down at the note from Mrs. Anderson, reading it again. You are already the right size. It was the kind of encouragement that stuck with you, the kind that echoed through your mind long after the words had faded. Her phone buzzed with another message from Nana. You know who to call, Emmy. No one changes the world alone. Emma stared at her screen, her heart beating faster. The humiliation of the flight was still raw, but now it felt different. No longer a wound, now a spark. She opened her photo gallery, scrolling through the discreet pictures she'd snapped. Linda's dismissive gestures, the scarf on her knees, even the moment she'd been denied service. Evidence, not just memories. Her fingers hovered over her contacts. She scrolled past school friends and family to a number she rarely used. The direct line to her Aunt Meredith, an attorney and rising executive at Silver Sky's parent corporation. Emma's mother had always said, if you ever feel unsafe or mistreated, Meredith will know what to do. She hesitated only a moment, then pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before Meredith answered, her voice brisk and warm. Emma? Honey, is everything all right? Emma took a breath. Hi, Aunt Meredith. I need your help. Something happened on my flight, and I don't think I can let it go. She recounted the story, her voice trembling at first, then gaining strength as she described every slight, every humiliating moment. She explained about Linda Cooper, about the public shaming, about the other passengers' complicity, and Mrs. Anderson's support. Meredith listened in silence. When Emma finished, there was a pause. Then, you did exactly the right thing calling me, Em. This isn't just a customer service issue. It's a pattern. And if you have photos, we have leverage. Do you want to make this official? Emma thought of all the girls who might sit in her seat someday, feeling alone, out of place, erased. She remembered Nana's words, Mrs. Anderson's gentle strength, the shy encouragement from the teenagers. Yes, she said, voice clear. I do. Okay, here's what happens next, Meredith replied, her tone shifting into professional resolve. Send me every photo and note. I'll start the complaint internally, but I'm also going to contact HR and legal. Silver Sky has a diversity policy, and they know I have a direct line to the board. They'll want to handle this quietly, but I'm not letting it go until you're heard. And Emma, be prepared. They might try to discredit you, so keep every message, every scrap of evidence. I'll call you tonight with next steps. Emma's hands shook as she hung up, but it was a good kind of tremor, the adrenaline of action, not fear. She forwarded the photos and her own written account, adding every detail she could remember. By now, the airport had begun to thin out. Emma watched other travelers hurry toward taxis and ride shares, their stories carrying on, uninterrupted. She felt both smaller and larger at the same time. Just one person, but now a person in motion, no longer passive, no longer silent. Have you ever decided enough was enough and taken a stand even when it scared you? What gave you the courage to act? Share your turning point below. Your story could help someone else make the call that changes everything. As she shouldered her bag and headed for the terminal exit, Emma's phone buzzed again. A message from Mrs. Anderson. "If you ever need a witness, you know where to find me. I meant what I said, Emma. You're stronger than you know." Emma smiled, tucking the note and her phone safely away. She stepped outside, letting the rush of California air wash over her. This city was new, her future unwritten, but for the first time all day, she felt the ground solid beneath her feet. She didn't know how Silver Sky would respond, or if justice would come easy, but she knew she'd made the call, and whatever happened next, she wouldn't have to face it alone. As the sun dipped low behind the city skyline, Emma walked forward, her head held high, her story just beginning. Emma had always imagined that justice was slow and distant, something that happened to other people in faraway places. But after her call with Aunt Meredith, it felt alarmingly close, urgent, and real. That evening, Emma sat by her hotel window, watching the Los Angeles skyline flicker with city lights. Her phone vibrated with updates. Meredith had forwarded her report to Silver Sky's legal and HR departments. The airline's leadership team was calling an emergency meeting for the next morning. Names were being flagged, statements requested. There was no more hiding for Linda Cooper. Nana's messages came in steady waves, always gentle but insistent. "Keep your head up, Emmy. They're counting on your silence. Don't give it to them." Mrs. Anderson texted as well, confirming that she'd written her own statement. "I've seen too much, Emma, to let this slide," she wrote. "If you need me, I'll be there." For the first time since the flight, Emma felt the heavy blanket of isolation begin to lift. It was no longer just her word against Linda's. Other voices, witnesses, supporters, allies, were joining in. The truth was gaining momentum. Silver Sky's HR team contacted Emma directly by early morning, their tone suddenly deferential. "Ms. Whitaker, we're taking your complaint very seriously. We're gathering evidence and have already placed certain staff members on leave pending investigation. Would you be willing to discuss your experience in detail on a recorded call?" Emma's nerves flared, but she remembered what Nana always said. "When you speak with truth, you never have to look over your shoulder." She agreed to the interview, recounting each detail with growing steadiness, how Linda had singled her out, the other passengers' complicity, Mrs. Anderson's support. As Emma spoke, she realized she was no longer trembling. Each word felt like a brick laid in the foundation of something unshakable. She wasn't a frightened girl anymore. She was a witness, a participant, a catalyst. Aunt Meredith updated her throughout the day. "I just got off the phone with the Silver Sky board chair," Meredith said, voice sharp with purpose. "This isn't their first complaint, but it's the first with evidence, multiple witnesses, and, frankly, the family connection to the parent company. They're moving fast." Emma pictured Linda and her allies being questioned, their smug certainty unraveling under scrutiny. She felt a pang of empathy. No one likes being exposed, but also a sense of justice. There had to be consequences, or nothing would change. By nightfall, Emma received confirmation. Silver Sky had begun a formal investigation, suspended Linda Cooper and 2 other crew members, and issued a public apology for any distress caused during your flight. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. Have you ever watched someone try to hide the truth, only to see it finally come to light? How did it feel when justice began to turn in your favor, even a little? Share your moments of vindication below. Sometimes hope comes in small steps. Emma stood at her window, gazing out at the city. She was tired, but she wasn't afraid. The storm had broken, and now the world was paying attention. For the first time, she truly believed her story mattered, and she was ready for whatever came next. Within 48 hours, Emma's story was everywhere. What began as a single, humiliating flight had spiraled into a national conversation. News outlets ran with the headline, "Teen passenger faces discrimination in first class. Airline responds after evidence emerges." Talk shows debated the treatment of young travelers. Social media lit up with the hashtag #FlyWithRespect, and Emma's inbox filled with messages, support, shared experiences, and even apologies from strangers who'd once been bystanders themselves. Silver Sky's official channels released a carefully worded apology. "We are deeply sorry for the distress caused to Ms. Whitaker and are committed to ensuring our staff uphold the highest standards of respect and inclusivity. The employees involved have been terminated, and a review of our first-class training and policies is already underway." It was more than Emma had expected. More, in truth, than she had dared to hope. Even as she watched Linda Cooper's photo disappear from Silver Sky's website and read the news of a wider industry investigation, Emma felt a complicated mix of vindication, relief, and lingering disbelief. She received calls from other passengers who had been on the flight, some who'd looked away out of fear or discomfort, now reaching out to apologize, to offer statements of support, to say that they remembered what really happened. The two teenagers who'd smiled at her sent a joint message. "We should have spoken up. You're braver than we were." Even the businessman across the aisle wrote, admitting he'd been wrong to stay silent. "Seeing you stand your ground made me rethink what courage looks like," he said. "Thank you." And then, the ripple grew larger. The Department of Transportation announced a review of Silver Sky's practices, while advocacy groups called for better protections and bias training across the industry. Emma watched these headlines unfold from her own kitchen table, Nana's arm wrapped around her shoulders, Mrs. Anderson on the phone celebrating quietly. "You did it, Emma. You really did." Have you ever witnessed a moment where one voice made all the difference? Or wished you'd spoken up sooner, then promised yourself you'd never be silent again? Share your stories below. Sometimes, all it takes is one brave step to inspire 1,000 more. For Emma, the journey was still sinking in. She knew she hadn't changed the world overnight, but she had changed something, starting with herself. The scarf from her grandmother, once a source of shame on that flight, now felt like a medal. She wore it proudly, her story woven into its threads. The story's real ending wasn't a headline or a trending hashtag. It was quieter, but deeper. The knowledge that her voice mattered, that dignity could survive even the worst humiliation, and that the power of a single act could ripple outward, touching lives she'd never even meet. As evening fell, Emma sat beside Nana, watching the sun set and the sky shift from blue to gold. She thought of all the other travelers out there, kids, elders, anyone who'd ever been made to feel small. And she hoped her story would remind them, you don't have to disappear. You are not alone. The world was still imperfect, but justice, like an airplane on a long journey, sometimes just needed a little lift to get off the ground.